Good morning, everybody. Esri Rosaire here. And today, a familiar face makes his return to the city of brotherly love. That, of course, is Doug Peterson, who brings his surprising 2-1 Jacksonville Jaguars to Lincoln Financial Field to take on his former team, the 3-0 Philadelphia Eagles. Now, as we all know, Doug Peterson is the first and only Eagles head coach to win the Super Bowl. And it's interesting, actually. So, a few days ago, Doug Peterson seemed to imply that he didn't know what kind of reaction he was going to get when he returned to the link. And my thoughts, it's obviously going to be a standing ovation. I can understand booing Carson Wentz because he gave up on the city of Philadelphia. He didn't want to fight for his job with Jalen Hurts. But why would any Eagles fan boo Doug Peterson? Carson Wentz and Doug Peterson are two completely different scenarios. Carson Wentz gave up on the city. Doug Peterson got fired. He was let go. He was terminated. And a lot of people, myself included, we didn't agree with that decision to fire Doug Peterson. You were coming off a coach, you were coming off 3 consecutive seasons where the team made the playoffs and won the Super Bowl in one of those seasons. 3 consecutive seasons with playoff appearances, a 4-1, no, excuse me, a 4-2 playoff record in that time span. And you fired Doug Peterson after one uncharacteristically bad year in 2020. Admittedly, his play calling during the 2020 season, it was not great. A lot of mediocre play calling that year, especially with going for two a lot. But Doug Peterson, I don't think he deserved to get fired. But needless to say, that was then, this is now. So similar to my feelings about the Detroit Lions game in week 1, I consider this Jacksonville Jaguars game a sneaky game, a trap game. And here's my reasoning behind that. So the Eagles, we are coming off a huge win over our former franchise quarterback, Carson Wentz. And we are playing against a team that a lot of people don't seem to think very highly of, a team that many people think will just blow past. Now the Jaguars, they could be for real. The Jaguars look for real right now. Did you see what they did to the Los Angeles Chargers last week? They went into SoFi Stadium and beat the Chargers 38 to 10. 38 to 10. Now, admittedly, the Chargers, they were dealing with a lot of injuries, including to Justin Herbert, who suffered his cracked ribs, I believe, against the Kansas City Chiefs on Thursday Night Football. They did miss a lot of people. They were pretty devastated by injuries. But, okay, even if you discount that, in week 2, the week before that, they embarrassed the Indianapolis Colts 24-0, a shutout. And for some reason, the Colts, they just don't play well in Jacksonville. The Colts have not won at Jacksonville since 2014. That is 8 years in a row of losing in Jacksonville. It's just crazy. It's a really weird streak. The Colts just, first, they can't play in week 1. They haven't won in week 1 since 2013, I believe. And then they just can't win in Jacksonville. This Jaguars team, they're very sneaky. So I want to start with their defense. The Jaguars are a top 5 defense right now. In fact, they're actually tied for the league lead in turnovers with the Baltimore Ravens and Tampa Bay Buccaneers at 8 turnovers. And they have the best rush defense in the league. Jacksonville, they will not let teams run on them. They pride themselves so far on stopping the run. This team can really just take your run game out of the playbook and then force you to be predictable. They can force you to throw the ball disproportionately to make you one-sided, make you know, like you basically, the Jaguars want to make you predictable. They want to make you one-dimensional. This team, their defense is very suffocating. It reminds me almost kind of, well, not quite, but there was a few seasons ago, 2017, when the Eagles won the Super Bowl. The Jaguars had a top defense that year. The fans were nicknaming it Saxonville. And that defense that year with Jalen Ramsey, Miles Jack, and all those guys, Calais Campbell, they had a really good defense that year. The Jaguars, it looks like they returned to that defensive form. This is a team that can really battle you in the trenches. This is a team that prides itself on beating you in the trenches. This is a very physical team. The Jaguars, so they like to take away the run and make you pass the ball disproportionately. And I want to talk about their offense too. So Trevor Lawrence, now that he's free from Urban Meyer, Doug Peterson is really doing this guy good. Like Doug Peterson, he's starting to unlock Trevor Lawrence's potential. We're starting to see the Trevor Lawrence that was envisioned when the Jaguars selected him with the first overall pick in the 2021 draft. They also have that receiver, Christian Kirk, who they picked up from the Arizona Cardinals. And their running back, I really like their running back, James Robinson. James Robinson runs with a purpose. James Robinson, he runs with efficiency. James Robinson, he runs with passion. The Jaguars, so they're a tough defense. They like to take away the ball. They like to stop the run. They like to force you to pass. And they like to run the ball heavily on you with James Robinson. This is a team that will battle you. This is a team that is very gritty. Now, the weather for this game is not going to be very good. I'm about to leave for this game, actually. The weather for this game today is going to be bad with the rain and everything, so that could affect the game plan with how the Jaguars want to run the ball with Robinson. But I could see this being a very low-scoring defensive struggle. I can, because this Jaguars team, these are not the same Jaguars of old. This is not the Jaguars team that went 3-14 last year or 1-15 the year before that. This Jaguars team under Doug Peterson, they have a swagger about them. They have a certain like revitalization going on over there in Duval County. Now I want to talk about our team, the Philadelphia Eagles. So last week against Washington, the Commodes, they basically took away our run game. And Hurts, he responded by beating the Washington Commodes with his arm. So I'm not worried about Jacksonville stopping our run because like I said before, Washington did that last week, but Hurts responded just fine by beating them with his arm. I don't see the run being a big factor in this game because of the weather and because of Jacksonville's tough defense. So it's going to come down to Jalen Hurts' arm. I believe that this game will rest on the arm of Jalen Hurts. If we can see him continue to make those big throws to Devontae Smith, to A.J. Brown, to Quez Watkins, to Dallas Goedert, we'll be in this game. We'll be in this game. So, and then the other thing I want to talk about, our defensive line. Last week, we sacked Carson Wentz 9 times. I believe that was our 4th most sacks in a single game. We forced 2 fumbles off of him. I knew that he was going to cough up the ball. Carson Wentz, he's just good for a turnover. He won't necessarily throw you an interception, but he knows how to lose them fumbles. He'll fumble the ball, that's for sure. That has been apparent ever since his rookie season in 2016. So the defensive line, coming off a fantastic performance against Washington, can they keep that up this week? Now, admittedly, Washington, they did have a banged up offensive line last week. So I'm not sure if we'll see quite as dominant a game from the pass rush, but can they make Trevor Lawrence uncomfortable? Can they make Trevor Lawrence fidgety? Can they make him hear footsteps? That's another key to winning this game. I kept saying last year that my main problem with the team was the pass rush, how we just weren't getting pressure on quarterbacks, how we were just letting quarterback complete like 80% of their passes. The pass rush this year, it's been all right. So Washington, it was amazing. It was amazing in Washington. In Detroit, week 1, I didn't like it. I didn't think we got enough pressure on Jared Goff. It looked better against Kirk Cousins in week 2 when we played the Vikings. In fact, I actually saw Jonathan Gannon blitzing a lot near the end of that game, which I was very happy to see coming off a season where the Eagles were one of the least blitzing teams in the league. Only 2 teams blitzed less than the Eagles last year, the Texans and the Raiders. And then this game against Washington last week, the pass rush was amazing. So can they keep up their momentum after a strong performance against our former franchise quarterback, Carson Wentz? You got to make Trevor Lawrence uncomfortable. You have to make Trevor Lawrence uncomfortable. Now, as for the run defense, I was terrified of this run defense after the first game against the Lions in week 1 at Detroit. The run defense got shredded. DeAndre Swift and Williams, they ran all over us. But starting in week 2, we've been very sturdy against the run. It's been very impressive to watch, actually. Kirk Cousins had more rushing yards than Dalvin Cook on Monday night 2 weeks ago. That is very hard to believe. And then Antonio Gibson, they didn't really do much last week with him on the ground. So the run defense, I'm not as worried about that. It's really the pass rush. The pass rush is my main concern about this game. Can we get a consistent pass rush on Trevor Lawrence? Because at the end of the day, he is a young quarterback, and he is prone to being basically kind of like that Jared Goff type. When you keep hitting him, he's going to get rattled, and he'll eventually start making a bunch of mistakes because he's young. He's inexperienced. So can we get that same pass rush that we saw last week? That is a key to winning this game. And I want to see, so let's not be too cute too, by the way, because there was a certain call last week on a 4th and 1 where we did an end around to Zach Pascal when I really thought that we should have ran the ball on that play. Why would you give it on an end around to Zach Pascal when you have Miles Sanders, Boston Scott, Kenneth Gainwell? It was just like a questionable call. Now, admittedly, that was like the only questionable call I saw, like the only really questionable one. But let's try to avoid stuff like that. And the big thing, another big thing, I want to see a score in the second half of this game. So in Detroit, I believe we were up 37 to 21 at half. No, excuse me. We were up 34 to 21 at halftime, I believe. Something like that. 35 or 34. We were up 35 to 21 at halftime. We have to score in the second half. That's been a big issue for us these past few games. So in week 2 against the Minnesota Vikings, we didn't score in the second half of that game. We were going to kick a field goal to go up 27-7, but that was actually blocked. And I thought that that was going to be a momentum swing in that game on Monday night, but it turned out not to be. And then this game last Sunday against Washington, we were up 24-0 at halftime, and then we didn't score in the second half. Admittedly, it was because of the margin of leading that the victory, basically the margin that we were leading by. I believe that determined the calling, like the complexion of the game in the second half. I believe if that lead was smaller, like 17-7 or like 14-10, we would have called that game a lot differently in the second half. We wouldn't have taken our foot off the gas, but I want to see us score in the second half today because, as I've said in a previous video, you're not going to get away with not scoring in the second half against every team. Teams we got later on the schedule like Green Bay, Tennessee Titans, the Cowboys, the New Orleans Saints, even the New York Giants. Like, you're not going to get away with that all the time. So I would like to see us score in the second half. And really, so the Eagles, we've had this thing where we keep losing to our former coaches. We keep losing to them. So our last win against a former coach was in 2005 when we went to Kansas City. We were down, I believe, 24-6 in that game, and we came back to win like 38-31, I believe. The Chiefs coach in that game was Dick Vermeil. Since then, we have gone on this losing streak against our former coaches. Andy Reid, who returned to Philadelphia for the first time in 2013 after he was fired in 2012, he beat us. And then in 2017, our Super Bowl year, week 2, we went to Kansas City. Andy Reid beats us again. And then last year, Andy Reid returns to Philadelphia for a second time. And in a game where the Eagles were very competitive, a game where they actually looked very good on offense, it looked like they could hang with the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs and Reid, they prevailed once again. So we are 0-3 against Andy Reid. Can we beat Doug Peterson? I love Doug Peterson. I'm going to be at this game. I'm going to give him a standing ovation. But can we beat Doug Peterson? Like, I really don't want Doug Peterson walking out of the link with a win today. I got nothing personal against Doug Peterson. I love Doug Peterson. He's a Philadelphia legend. He got the job done that nobody else did. Dick Vermeil couldn't do it. Andy Reid couldn't do it. Buddy Ryan couldn't do it. All those guys that couldn't win the Super Bowl, Doug Peterson was the guy that was. But we cannot let him come into our stadium and win this game. Like, we got to beat Doug Peterson. I think that he's going to have that motivation on his mind. The fact that he got fired by the Eagles in 2020 after 3 straight seasons of leading that team to the playoffs, which included a Super Bowl win. I think Doug Pearson, he's going to have that in the back of his mind. So, Nick Sirianni, I need you to really dig deep in this game because I've been satisfied with your work so far, aside from that 4th-and-1 call with Zach Pascal last week. And Jonathan Gannon's defense, I got to give him props. I've said it before at this point, but Jonathan Gannon's defense has surprised me in these last 2 weeks. Steamrolled the Minnesota Vikings, absolutely took Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, Dalvin Cook out the game. Last week, we basically smothered Terry McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, Antonio Gibson. Now the Jaguars offense, I don't believe is as good as those last 2 teams, so I think that our defense should have another good game. But I will not be surprised if this game is close. I will not be surprised if the Eagles are trailing in the 4th quarter because I think this is a trap game. The Jaguars, they aren't the same team of the past. This game, I believe the Eagles will win this game, but I think it'll be by a score of 20-17. I take the Eagles by a field goal over the Jacksonville Jaguars to improve to 4-0 for the first time since 2004 when we went to the Super Bowl with Donovan McNabb and Terrell Owens. So take care, everybody, and go Birds.